up guys, it's Skill Up here. I hope you're having an awesome week. This episode of the Weekly Vendor Reset is sponsored by Bluemouth Direct. This one is for the Australians who typically have to put up with everything being really overpriced and exorbitant shipping fees. Bluemouth Direct sells stuff like Scuf gaming controllers and Astro headsets. It sells them in Australia, which means the shipping is cheap, and if you use Skill Up at purchase, you actually get a 5% discount as well. The details for that are in the description below. Thank you to them for sponsoring this episode, and let's get straight into it. At the gear vendor in the base of operations, there is a prototype performance mod that's rolled for support station range 6.5% out of a max of 7.5%. At the Dark Zone gear vendor, there's another prototype performance mod. This one has rolled for turret damage 3.5% out of a max of 4%. At the advanced weaponry vendor, there's an M870 Express here. This one has got 290% stagger, which is on the low side. It's got predatory, which is a pretty good sustained focus talent in PvE. It's pretty terrible in PvP. Destructive is excellent in PvE, but again, pretty average in PvP. And finally, competent and excellent talent to have extra bonus damage when you use an ability, and the fact that it's in the third slot means you don't need to worry about the electronics requirement. Overall, a fairly solid shotgun, but definitely tailored to the PvE side of things. I gotta say, I think this is probably the best collection of exotic weapons that we've seen thus far in terms of the rolls on them. This week's Pakhan starts us off. It's got 14% damage out of cover, which is a max roll. It's got competent on it, which we've spoken about. Great talent, but you do need to be aware of the 3800 electronics requirement. Brutal is excellent, but definitely suited to PvE, as it's much harder to hit consecutive headshots in PvP, and obviously the Pakhan talent is baked in. This is overall a pretty damn solid Pakhan, especially if you're using it in PvE. I would recommend checking this one out. Next up, we have the Historian. This one's rolled 141 headshot damage, definitely on the low side. It does have destructive though, great talent for PvE. Deadly is probably not suited to this weapon, given that you're probably not stacking a lot of crit on it. You're probably going to be stacking something like headshot damage, so you may want to roll that off for something else, something like Brutal for example, but the fact that it has that destructive base talent is pretty damn good. The Cassidy this week has rolled with Meticulous. Now this is particularly great with this weapon since you are going to be reloading with it a hell of a lot of times. It has only the 2 bullets in the mag, so yeah, being able to fire off this thing and hope that it reloads itself is very handy. Commanding, roll that away, you don't need it, and that boomstick talent is baked in. The Centurion this week has rolled Cool-Headed, which is one of the best talents that you can roll on a pistol. Again, be aware of the electronics requirement, but still, it is absolutely fantastic. And finally, we've got this Liberator here. It's rolled Prepared, which doesn't really work for the Liberator because the 30 meters is a bit too far to be able to use this weapon effectively. Commanding, we've talked about, is terrible, and Determined is okay. It's nothing fantastic. It's, you know, a bit of extra skill cooldown when you drop a target, but you do need to land the killing blow when you do that, which means it doesn't really work that well in group scenarios. So those are the exotic weapons for the week. Not bad at all. The Cassidy in particular quite strong. Historian is decent, and I think the Pakhan is excellent. There's an AUG A3 Para here that's rolled 21% crit hit chance, a bit sort of mid-tier roll on that one. Meticulous is pretty good on this, but not a big deal given the fact that this actually has a very quick reload speed, so it's not great. Brutal is fantastic in PvE, and Dominant in that third slot is great because it means you can roll it away, and whatever you get in replacement of it is going to be free. So example, you could get something like Responsive or Competent or Adept or any other number of talents, and they're going to be free to you. You don't need to worry about the stat requirement in that third slot. So not a terrible AUG there. There is an LVOA here, and I know everyone's always excited about them. This one is not great though. Accurate is pretty good on this, to be honest, because it does have some reticle spread, but not really what you'd want it overall. Dominant, terrible talent, and Skilled. Headshot damage with this weapon increases signature skill resource by 5%. Great talent if you are building towards that style of play where you're looking to use your signature skill very rapidly, and if you are playing solo, then you want to be able to get maximum uptime on your signature skills, but in most contexts, this is not the talent that you'd want to be running with. There's a Striker's Backpack here that's rolled base firearms 1258 out of a max of 1272, so quite a strong roll. It's rolled base health as well, which is excellent, and burn resistance, which is one of the best minor attributes that you'd want if you're going to be taking this thing into PvP. Overall, a very solid Striker's Backpack. There's a Deadeye Holster here as well, which is rolled base health. That's pretty good. It does obviously have a very low stamina roll, which you'd probably want to up. You could reuse your your recalibration roll on that, but I know Deadeye is very popular, so there it is if you need it. Decent rolls this week on the blueprints as well. We've got an M870 Express here. It's that big hard-hitting shotgun that was the bane of like 1.5. It has been obviously nerfed since then, and now it's not as great as it used to be, but it's still pretty damn powerful, so pick that up if you're down for that. Surplus SVD is the other one here. This one is the sort of the go-to weapon in the Deadeye build. Gives you lots and lots of throughput, very, very stable to use. Just a really fantastic all-round weapon. It's always been my favorite marksman rifle, and it's certainly one of the strongest marksman rifles at the moment, so do check that one out as well. There's an Electronics Gloves blueprint, which is pretty great if you're wanting to roll a pair of Electronics Savage gloves. Stamina Mask blueprint, and probably the best thing this week is this extended magazine blueprint. The devs have indicated that in the 1.6.1 quality of life patch, which should be out, I'd say, in probably about a month, I'm gonna say, given the fact that the PTS should go live pretty soon, as they've indicated. And then obviously there's a few weeks of testing, and then on it goes. We can probably expect within about a month's time, extended magazines are going to have a larger size available to them when you're rolling them at this level 34 level. This is the blueprint that you are going to want to be able to do that, so do pick this one up ASAP. At the Meat Locker Safe House this week, there's an AK-47 here. This one has rolled Predatory, Determined, and Destructive. Predatory we've spoken about. Determined has that very high electronics requirement, so you'd probably want to roll it away, and Destructive we've spoken about as well. Overall, fairly solid roll across this one. Not a must-have, but certainly pretty good if you're looking for a good AK-47. They are good weapons to use, in particular with the Predator's Mark build, because they have the highest per bullet damage of any assault rifle, making it a very good fit for that style of play. At the Ward Safe House, there's a stamina mod this week that's rolled base stamina 243 as well as 3,270 health. You can use this sort of mod to stack on as much stamina as possible, but it's really not the most efficient way to do that, because stacking stamina as a core stat is way less efficient than stacking firearms or electronics and then getting lots of bonus health in major attributes. However, if you really wanted to pile on as much health as possible, this is the sort of mod that you want to take. At the Southpaw Safe House, two things that work really well for shield users. The first is a pair of Spec Ops gloves that's rolled base electronics 1255 out of 1272, so good roll there. It's got Decisive on it, which means you deal more damage with your sidearm. That's not with your SMG, by the way. If you've got an SMG because you're using the defense gear set, these gloves won't do anything for you. This is if you're using a normal pistol. It's got, in terms of the rolls here, it's got assault rifle damage, enemy armor damage, and pistol damage. So obviously these two work really well, enemy armor damage and pistol damage. Assault rifle damage, you can roll that for whatever you like otherwise, and then it becomes a fairly solid pair of gloves to be using with any ballistic shield build. Well, except for the defense gear set, of course. Secondly, we also have this prototype performance mod here, 7% shield health out of 7.5% max. This is the one that you're going to want to be using if you're running legendary or heroic incursions, since your shield will get pretty wrecked otherwise. At the Firewall Safe House this week, we have an electronics mod that's rolled base electronics. It's 249, and it's got 3,252 skill power. At the Crypt Safe House, there's another LVOA-C here, so I'm going to talk about it even though it's bad, otherwise people will be asking about it in the comments. It does have 22% enemy armor damage, which is fine. The per bullet damage is on the lower side though. This is definitely lower than other vendor LVOAs that we've seen before. Self-preserved on this thing is fine, so long as you're stacking lots of crit. Swift is not required since its reload speed is already pretty fast as it is, and prepared doesn't really work with this because 30 meters is well and truly too long an engagement distance. This weapon just has too much instability, so my advice on this one is to definitely give it a pass. At the East 64th Street DZ checkpoint, we have ourselves a prototype firearms mod, 256 firearms and 2,945 health. The health roll is definitely on the low side, but the firearms is a mid-tier roll. At the East 58th Street DZ checkpoint, we have a Nimble holster this week. It's 1,200 in the firearms and stamina and 1,100 in the electronics. It's rolled base reload speed, which means you're probably going to want to change that to something else. You'll be stuck with that low electronics roll. Nimble has been flagged for the nerf bat in the upcoming 1.6.1 quality of life patch. I'm not really sure why it needs to change. It's very strong, sure, but it doesn't seem vastly overpowered. Regardless, the developers have indicated that it is on the chopping block. So do be aware of that. Enjoy it while you can. At the Park Avenue DZ checkpoint, 2 weapons worth talking about here. The first is a tactical ACR, 22% enemy armor damage, fine. It's actually a fairly high per bullet damage roll on this one as well. That will be different for you, by the way, because it scales based on your firearms. I get that question all the time, so I always prefer to say it just to make sure. We've got destructive here in the top slot. We've got brutal in the second and competent in the third. It's a really well-rolled PvE-focused assault rifle, and the good thing about the ACR is it's really nice to use as well. Very stable recoil profile. Less damage than the LVOA or the M4, but certainly much nicer to use. So my advice, do check it out if you want to mix it up and just give a different type of assault rifle a chance. The other one is this Black Market SASG 12, 313% stagger, pretty strong, destructive, sure, ferocious, great talent in PvE, but it does have the electronics requirement, or all stats across the board actually in 3800, and fierce, which you probably don't want with this thing. You probably want to get something like responsive in that third slot, would make it a very solid SASG for PvE focused content. At the East 53rd Street DZ checkpoint, we do have a pair of Savage Gloves. They have very low electronics roll, critical hit chance, assault rifle damage, and enemy armor damage is actually a fairly strong combination of rolls there, but yeah, the low electronics does hurt this, be aware of that. At the East 46th Street DZ checkpoint, we have a Ballistic Shield Damage Resilience Prototype Performance mod, 4.5% out of a max of 5%. This reduces your damage taken when you have your shield out and you get damage from the side or from the back. It does not reduce the damage taken of your shield. At the East 42nd Street DZ checkpoint, there is a G36 here. It's 21% enemy armor damage. 19k per bullet damage is actually quite strong. It's got brutal, prepared, and focused. The brutal is great for PvE. Prepared, not good for this weapon because the engagement range is too long, and focused is pretty terrible since the not using your abilities is a huge loss of damage, well and truly more than 10%. So I like the G36. It feels fantastic to use. I don't think this one is a must-have, but if you really want to try out a G36, then there it is. At the 5th Avenue DZ checkpoint, there's a custom M44 here that's rolled 162% headshot damage. Good roll there. Vicious actually works quite well in this weapon because you want to be sitting at the back, not taking damage, which means hopefully you'll have full health most of the time. Harmful is pretty average, and you could roll that away. And cool-headed is pretty good on this thing. It would be better on something else, given the rate of fire on this is quite slow. However, the fact is you are going to be aiming for headshots with this thing, and you should have enough time to line them up. So if you get yourself 5 headshots in a row, that's 25% cooldown off your cooldown timers. That's very handy indeed. So not a bad M44, certainly one of the better cool-headed focused weapons we've seen in some time. The other thing is this prototype electronics mod here, 243 electronics, which is a mid-tier roll, and 3,188 health, which is also a mid-tier roll. At the DZ8 safe house, there's a pair of Tactician's Authority gloves that are worth talking about. There's it's got 1205 electronics, which is fairly low. They do have skill haste on them though, which is very handy. Health on kill pretty average, and marksman rifle damage, which you may want, you probably don't, you probably want to change that for something else. Either way, the combination of electronics plus skill haste is a really good start with these gloves, so do check those out. At the DZ6 checkpoint, a few things to talk about here as well. Deadeye Acquisition System Mask, it's got base firearms in 1242, which is a mid-tier roll. Base skill power is also really helpful, so that's great. There's a Reclaimer support pack here. It's 1194 electronics, which is very low, but it does have that base health roll on it, which is really useful. And finally, we have a Striker's Holster here. It does have a fairly low set of rolls on the electronics and stamina, but it does have that base skill haste, which can be really useful if you're running the hybrid build, which is very popular at the moment. At the DZ4 vendor this week, a really good electronics mod, 259 base electronics and 3,285 skill power. Both are really great rolls. Definitely one of the better purchases this week. At the DZ3 vendor, the guy that sells all the weapons, a few things to talk about here. The first is a Police T821. 22.5% critical hit chance, not too shabby. It's got Adept on it, which is bonus crit, really helpful talent to help you reach the 60% crit cap chance fast. It's got Self-Preserved, which obviously works really well on any SMG since they have a lot of crit on them. And finally, it has Meticulous, which I don't recommend you take because it has a very quick reload speed anyway, and I'd strongly recommend getting something like Responsive, and then it would be a pretty decent weapon. I mean, the TA-21 is definitely the weakest SMG you can get because of its slow rate of fire. However, if you just want to try out something different, this is a good set of talents to be rolling with. Secondly, we have a tactical ACR here. The enemy armor damage roll is low. However, it does have Unforgiving, which is great for PvP. It's got Adept on it, which we spoke about a moment ago, and it does have Fierce in it, which I think is probably not the best talent for that third slot. I'd go for something else. This is definitely not as strong as an M4 or an LVOA if you are taking this into PvP, but again, if you want to change it up and try something different, then these talents will certainly work for you. And that's it, guys. That's the weekly vendor reset done. Don't forget to check that link in the description below for Bluemouth Direct. Other than that, guys, drop the video a like, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.